Hello, I am Laureen Sims. I'm a professor in the Department of Education at Gallaudet University with a special interest in early language acquisition for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. As we all know, having a strong language foundation sets the stage for everything in our lives. Thinking, reading, learning, our day-to-day communication with others. But what does it take for children who are deaf and hard of hearing to crack the code for language learning? Evidence is uncovering more and more about how hearing children, as well as children who are deaf or hard of hearing, learn language. Join me and my colleagues as we examine recommended practices for supporting early development of strong language foundations for children who are deaf or hard of hearing, and why. Together, we will guide you in looking at evidence-based reasoning for using an approach that facilitates language development in two modalities or ways: visually and auditorily. The approach we will talk about today looks at facilitating American Sign Language and spoken English early in a child's life, from birth through age 5. Before we get started, I want to highlight that when we are discussing American Sign Language, we are talking about a full, natural, visual language that has its own grammar and syntax. It is not simply a manual version of English. Are you ready? First, we will explore the evidence informing us about the essential factors needed for all children to learn language. Next, we will examine how this evidence points to use of a bilingual approach, which includes both American Sign Language and spoken English, to maximize language acquisition for young children who are deaf or hard of hearing. Let's begin with looking at what evidence shows is fundamental to language learning. Before we get started, keep in mind that there are many aspects of evidence in the field of early childhood, not only empirical research. Evidence also includes documentation of practitioner and family experiences and insights. 3 important factors emerge in the evidence which impact how any child acquires language. Language must be accessible, interactive, and abundant. Let's walk through each of these 3 factors. First and foremost, language must be accessible. But what do we mean by accessible language? A child must be able to hear or see the language consistently. Doing so inconsistently creates a barrier for learning that language. Now, let's talk about access.
While evidence tells us that the brain is bioprogrammed to learn language, it does not show the brain is biased to learning language only through speech. The brain is looking for patterns, and those patterns can be visual and/or auditory. Signs or sounds arranged in a specific way, which then begin to take on meaning. Research confirms that the auditory cortex of the brain responds the exact same way to spoken language as it does to sign language. That means there's no difference, neurologically speaking, between these two languages. Language is language, spoken or signed. So how does the brain develop these patterns? Children who are born deaf or hard of hearing do not start their lives with full access to sound. This makes it challenging for them to identify the patterns needed to learn language through their hearing. These patterns may or may not become accessible as a child is fitted with hearing aids and/or cochlear implants. Evidence shows us, however, that even after hearing aids and/or cochlear implants are fitted, learning to listen takes time. We frequently say that children must learn to listen before they can use their listening to learn. Some children will obtain enough access to develop the ability to use their listening to learn language, while others will not. Spoken language outcomes, even with early fitting of listening technologies and quality listening and spoken language intervention, are varied and uncertain. For children who cannot fully access language through listening, vision will play a large part in learning language. Similarly, to develop the patterns to acquire a visual language, a child must have access to visual language. All children with typical visual abilities, including children who are deaf or hard of hearing, are born equipped and ready to acquire language visually. Evidence is convincing that it's critical to look closely at the role visual language will play for a child who is deaf or hard of hearing. We need to capitalize on their immediate and ready potential to develop a full language in this way. Evidence also clearly indicates that access to language must occur early in a child's life for language development to proceed without delay. There is a critical period between birth and 5 years of age when the brain is most receptive to language learning. A child who has not acquired language by this time will face a greater challenge in developing native-like fluency in any language, spoken or signed. Delay in early access to language can negatively impact communication, thinking, problem-solving, learning, and social-emotional development. And last, in discussing language accessibility, it is important to highlight that neuroscience shows that the brain has the capacity to develop 2 languages and 2 modalities without harm to development of language in either modality. Providing early access to both a visual language and a spoken language is a win-win scenario. We don't want to lose the opportunity for language development in either language or modality.
Following accessible, the next factor found in evidence as being critical to language learning is that language must be interactive. Research with hearing children indicates the importance of natural, interactive language for shaping brain architecture by building neural connections. The Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University describes this natural language interaction as serve and return. Serve and return looks at language interactions similar to a game, such as tennis. When an infant or a young child babbles, gestures, or cries, an adult responds appropriately with interactions such as eye contact, words, or a hug. These back-and-forth interactions build neural connections and strengthen a child's brain to support the development of communication and social skills. Other evidence for hearing children and spoken language shows that social interactions with another human being affects speech learning in a way that resembles communicative learning in songbirds, and that through this interaction, infants learn to detect patterns which lead to the discovery of new words. Natural interactive language is equally critical to help children who are deaf and hard of hearing recognize patterns. This interaction must occur in a modality that is accessible to a child, be it visual and/or auditory, based on the characteristics of each child. For example, when a baby is acquiring sign language, repetition and reinforcement of the open and closed hand shape evolves to become the sign milk. Likewise, the spoken word mama is built upon repeated vocalization and reinforcement of ma, ma, ma. Research directly with children who are deaf or hard of hearing shows the importance of interaction between the child and his or her family members and caretakers, and indicates that this interaction is one of the strongest predictors for language development, early reading, and social-emotional development.
The third factor essential to language learning is that language must be plentiful and abundant throughout a child's life.
Perhaps you've heard about the 30 Million Words Initiative. This initiative, based on the book 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain, stresses the importance of expanding a child's vocabulary through a language-abundant environment. This means immersing children in a high-quality language environment all day, every day. It is based on widely cited research from the early 1990s by Hart and Risley, showing the impact of language deprivation in lower-income families, and the importance of closing the gap in the number of words a child hears before they are 3 years of age. This initiative emphasizes the positive impact of vocabulary development on language, cognitive, and literacy outcomes. While this initiative is based in research involving hearing children with the goal of making spoken language abundant, abundant language is equally essential for children who are deaf or hard of hearing, whether that be through American Sign Language or spoken language. Language must be abundant. In making language abundant, it is important to keep in mind the evidence which shows that hearing children learn language incidentally, in passing, from the natural language and communication surrounding them. A parent talking from across the room, the TV in the corner. Likewise, for deaf children born into signing families, they have access to incidental language by watching their parents sign across the room or by watching ASL video stories. To increase opportunities for incidental learning for all children who are deaf and hard of hearing, evidence and experience tell us that it is important to be mindful of the environment and to ensure that incidental language is plentiful and accessible.